Okay, so we're back to our book, the third day, and we have gotten to the part where Amy Ann is going to go to the school board, even though she doesn't really want to, and she's going to speak up. Now, the first thing that we know about Amy Ann is that she's nervous. She thinks one thing, but she always kind of goes along with the flow, except when she said she wanted to go to the school board meeting, and she actually got to go. So, this chapter is common sense. Thursday came quick and suddenly. Dad was driving me to the school board meeting in his truck. The school board meeting where I was supposed to tell everyone why I liked from the mixed up files of Miss Basil E. Frankwiller. With every mile that passed, I regretted opening my mouth a little bit more. The school board meeting was in a room on the third floor of a big gray building downtown. There was a curved table at the front where some of the school board members were already sitting, and two sections of uncomfortable seats facing them, with an aisle running down the middle. And right in the front of the aisle was a podium with a microphone on it. The microphone I was supposed to get up and talk into. The folded piece of paper with the speech I'd written about from the mixed up files crinkled in my pocket. I'd only ever stolen one thing in my entire life, a lollipop from the grocery store when I was 4. I snatched it while we were in the checkout line and stuck it in my pocket. But I was old enough to know that it was wrong and that the lollipop felt radioactive the whole way out the door and into the parking lot. I felt like everybody could see it, like everybody knew I was a bad girl. It burned so hot that I broke down in tears and confessed before we even got in the car. That piece of notebook paper in my pocket felt like that now. I was surprised it hadn't set off all kind of alarms on the way into the building. How was I ever going to stand up and read what I'd written in front of all these people? Miss Jones, the librarian, saw us come in and hurried over to give me a hug. She was wearing a black dress with white polka dots tonight and big black polka dots for earrings. Oh, honey, I'm so glad you came tonight, she said. Amy Ann's our own honorary librarian, she told Dad. I think she spends more time in the library than I do. Miss Jones took a deep breath. She had Oh, I was sorry about that. I was suddenly worried Miss Jones was going to let it slip that I hung out there every afternoon instead of going to clubs. She didn't know I'd been lying to Mom and Dad. She held out her hand to Dad instead. Opal Jones, she said. Opal's a pretty name, Dad said, shaking her hand. Miss Jones blushed. Grown up ladies always act weird around my dad. Mom says it's because he has bricklayer arms and movie star smile. My parents gave me an interesting first name because our last name was Smith, Miss Jones said. Then I went and married a man named Jones. She just shrugged. What can you do? So, what's all this about book banning? Dad asked. Miss Jones took a deep breath. She had big lungs to fill. It's not the first time we've had a book challenged in the library, but it's the first time the school board has gone over my head to pull a book from the shelves all by themselves. And it's all because of that woman there. Dad followed her gaze to a petite, pretty white woman with short blonde hair. She wore a matching lavender shirt and jacket. She doesn't look like a book burner, Dad said. That is Miss Sarah Spencer, a pillar of our fair community, Miss Jones said. She's a member of the Shelbourne Elementary PTA, the Shelbourne Elementary Playground Redevelopment Committee, the Riley Race for the Cure Foundation, the North Carolina Art Museum Board, and the North Carolina State Opera Society. Oh, my dad said, suddenly interested because of the opera. My stomach seized up and I grabbed his arm. I did not want him to start singing at the school board meeting. More importantly, said Miss Jones, Miss Spencer and her husband are rich, which means the school board listens to her even more than they listen to me, the person they hired to do the job. I didn't know Miss Spencer, but I knew the boy in the seat beside her. His name was Trey. He was in Miss Vaughn's fourth grade homeroom with me, but he and I had a history. He had the same blonde hair as his mom, only messier, and wore an untucked blue polo shirt and jeans. He looked up from the notebook he was drawing in, caught me staring at him, and quickly looked away. One of the school board members called the meeting to order, and we sat down with Miss Jones. The seats in the audience weren't even half full. The board members talked about some boring stuff that only future lawyer Rebecca would have been interested in, and then it was time for public comment. That meant people could come to the podium to speak. I sank down into my chair a little, the paper in my pocket crinkling louder than firecrackers to me. Dr. Opal Jones is our first speaker, one of the school board members said. I sat up. She's a doctor? Not a medical doctor said. Library science, probably. There were library scientists? My eyes went wide as I imagined librarians in lab coats looking at books under microscopes, like crime scene investigators on TV. Wild, hairy library scientists cataloging books with giant machines that crackled with electricity. Mad library scientists swirling new words around in glass beakers. I was so busy imagining what it would be like to be a library scientist that I missed most of Miss Jones's speech. But worse than ignoring the request for reconsideration forms and the whole system this school board put into place to review challenges to books, Miss Jones was saying, is the larger question of intellectual freedom. Some of the school board members rolled their eyes and shifted in their seats, like we all do in Miss Vaughn's class when she starts telling us how we're all going to need to know how to use fractions one day, so we better pay attention. Miss Jones didn't seem to notice. It's our job as educators to expose our children to as many different kinds of books and as many different points of view as possible. That means letting them read books that are too easy for them or too hard for them. That means letting them read books that challenge them or do nothing but entertain them. And yes, it means letting students read books with things in them we might disagree with and letting them make up their own mind about things, which is downright scary sometimes. But that's what good education is all about. Some of the board members were shuffling papers and checking their phones. None of them seemed to be paying much attention to her. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Jones said, every parent has the right to decide what their child can and can't read. What they cannot do is make that decision for everyone else. I respectfully ask that the school board overturn the arbitrary closed-door decision to remove these books and to require any parent still concerned about the library materials to follow the established reconsideration policy set up by this board. Thank you. Most of the school board members were looking at the table in front of them when she finished. Not at Miss Jones. One of them coughed. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Miss Spencer, you wanted to speak? Trey's mom went to the podium. Unlike Mrs. Jones, she didn't have a piece of paper to read from. Ladies and gentlemen of the school board, I grew up in this county. I was a student at Shelbourne Elementary once, she said. And no, I won't say how long ago. A couple of the school board members laughed. Back then, the school library was a safe place, a place where parents could trust their children weren't going to pick up a book that taught them how to lie or steal or cheat. They weren't going to find a book that told them more about their bodies than they were ready to know about at the age of 10 or 9 or 5. They weren't going to find a book that showed them it was all right to talk back and be disrespectful to adults. Call me old fashioned, but I don't think school should be a place where a parent's authority is undermined. I think it should be a place where it's reinforced. I frowned. No book I read in the library taught me to lie or steal or cheat. Every kid who had any kind of brains knew how to do all that stuff already. And I was respectful of adults. I always did whatever they told me to do, even when I knew it was a load of pony poop. Miss Jones never used the word censorship, but it was there behind everything she said. Miss Spencer said, "It's not for censorship. I'm for common sense. We have to protect our children. It's not censorship to keep things away from children that aren't age appropriate. It's common sense." I'm sure Miss Jones wouldn't call it censorship to keep adult magazines filled with sex out of her library. Sex? Who was she spelling that out for? Did she think the kids in the room had never heard the word sex before or that we couldn't spell it? This is just 11 books, Miss Spencer said. That leaves thousands more in the elementary school library for our children to enjoy. Far better books, too. I have only asked to remove those books that are inappropriate or have no redeeming value. You made the right decision to remove these books from the library, and I hope you can trust in your own wisdom and common sense as parents to see that no child is ever exposed to them again. Thank you. Beside us, Miss Jones cleared her throat and shifted in her seat. Thank you, Miss Spencer, one of the board members said. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this issue? He asked. Miss Jones looked over at me and smiled. Dad gave me a questioning look. This was it. This was why I had that piece of paper in my pocket. Why I'd gotten my parents to rearrange their schedules to bring me here. Why I was in a boring meeting room at 7 o'clock on a school night instead of sitting in my bed reading a book. They both expected me to get up and say something, to tell the school board why they shouldn't ban Miss Frankwiller. And all I had to do was stand up and walk to the podium. My heart thumped in my chest, and I stared straight ahead. Anyone? The school board member asked again. The school board waited. Miss Spencer waited. Miss Jones waited. Dad waited. I sucked on my braids. All right, then, the school board member said. There being no more comment on the matter, I move to uphold the board's decision to remove these books from Shelbourne Elementary Library. Second, someone said. No, I was supposed to say something. I wanted to say something, but I hadn't. I couldn't. All in favor? Aye, a bunch of them said. All opposed? Nay, two of them said. Motion carries. Anyone else have another issue they'd like us to hear? And just like that, it was over. One of the other adults in the audience got up to complain about how much homework their kids brought home, but I was barely listening. That was it. My one chance to speak up. My one chance to tell them why my favorite book was so great. And I'd done what I'd always did. I sat there and said nothing. My face was so hot. I thought it would catch fire. I grabbed onto the bottom of my metal chair on both sides and hung on. I couldn't even look at Miss Dad or Miss Jones. The school board moved on to talking about bids on plumbers for another school, and my dad huffed. I don't think we need to sit around for the rest of this. We've already wasted enough time. I nodded, trying not to cry. I'm going to wait until the end, Miss Jones whispered. Bend the ear of one or two of those board members. Good luck, Dad told her. I looked up at Miss Jones as I slid past her down the aisle. I'm sorry, I told her. Oh, there's nothing for you to be sorry about at all, honey, Miss Jones said. She took my hand and squeezed it. You didn't do anything. I know. That's the problem, I wanted to say, but I didn't. So tomorrow we'll have to figure out what happens now. So she went to the school board meeting and she did what she always did. She didn't say anything. So we'll have to see what happens next.